Okay. Great. Well, welcome to Connect and Create. I'm Karina Sephora, and we have the awesome and amazing guest, Holland Hopson, with us today. And before I introduce Holland, I'm going to share just a little bit with you about Connect and Create. It's a show that I started at the beginning of the pandemic, and it was really out of me kind of missing going out and seeing people at art openings and lectures and anything really. And so I thought it would be a nice way to be able to connect with other people and see what could get created. And I think we're at episode 40. Are we 48 now? I think we're episode 48. And or 47, might be 47. And at any rate, we've had a lot of episodes. And this year I was the proud recipient of a grant from Fulton County Council for the Arts. So thank you. And thank you, Fulton County Council for the Arts, for your support. And we have some new guests arriving. Hello. We actually started about a half a minute early, which is unusual. Usually I'm trying to get Facebook Live to connect. So welcome, Susie and Stephen. Thank you for being here. And all of you that are watching on Facebook Live, thank you for being here. So Holland, I'm going to introduce you formally, but anything you'd like to say to be present?
Just so happy to be here today. Thanks so much for the invitation to speak, and look forward to our conversation.
Awesome, awesome. And just a little background, Holland and I met at the Hambidge Arts Center in June of last year, 2020, that last year. And he's extraordinary musician and talented genius artist. And you also inspired me to do a whole bunch more of those fire paintings too, by the way. So anyway, so I'm going to share a little bit about Holland. Holland is a sound and media artist. He's a composer and improviser. Some of his recent exhibits include the Southern Sonic Sound Art Festival, which has a lot of alliteration, at the Contemporary Art Center in New Orleans, and the automated exhibit in the Fringe Arts Festival in Bath, UK, and a multi-instrumentalist. Holland usually performs on clawhammer banjo and electronics using his own highly responsive, interactive computer programs. And Holland has performed in Australia, Europe, and North America, along with notable experimental and outsider musicians, such as MacArthur Genius Award winners Anthony Braxton and George Lewis. Live electronics pioneer David Beeman, and sonic mediator.
Yeah.
Oh, come on, look at you. And Pauline Oliveros. Holland has held residencies at the Atlantic Center for the Arts. Oh, I've been really wanting to go there. The Hambidge Center in North Georgia, where we met. Help me out with this one. Lemmerplex.
Oh, Lemurplex.
Lemurplex in Brooklyn. How cool is that? And Harvest Works Digital Media Arts in New York. We have the train right now. I'm not sure if you all can hear that, but we do have a little bit of train going by. So Holland is assistant professor of arts and entrepreneurship in New College at the University of Alabama, and a fellow of the Collaborative Arts Research Initiative, CAR. So with all of his professional accolades, Holland, thank you so much for taking the time to be here. And personally, I'm really looking forward to catching up and hearing and seeing. There's not a lot of musicians that you can say that you're looking forward to seeing what they're up to. But Holland, I know that you live in both worlds. So thank you for being here.
Thanks, Karina. So now it's my turn. Yeah. All right, great. So my thought for today, the way that I thought we would structure this conversation was a little bit of an affirmation, which is that practice is practice. And what I mean by that is I'm punning on the dual music versus visual art part of my own arts practice. And so as a musician, we talk about practice, where we're not really making work, we're just woodshedding. maybe we're learning scales or working on fingerings or doing the fundamental work that isn't really about always being creative or putting it out there. And then in the art world, we talk about practice, like what is your art practice? What is it that you make? What is it that you do? And throughout my time producing creative work, I've often been torn. As we'll see, I do a little bit of this and a little bit of that and have a foot in the music world and a foot in the arts world. And sometimes it's hard to know, what should I be doing today in the studio? What is going to move the practice along? And the thing that I come back to is practice is practice. And so it doesn't matter, just get busy doing something. And so that's what I'm going to share, some of what I've done, and maybe in the process we can illuminate some of the connections between this disparate work. First, in the chat, I'm just going to throw a web address and also my email in case anyone wants to contact me. I'd be happy to continue this conversation after Create and Connect. So please hit me up. And now I'd like to jump to more of a formal presentation to share some of this with you. And this is structured. We're going to start with sort of the music side of things and then move to the visual art side of things. And so on the music side, I want to start by thinking about instruments, because some of my work is defined by the instruments that I choose and even the instruments that I build. I didn't build this banjo. This banjo was made by Eric Proust in Washington State. But what I did do is add electronics to it. I added sensors to it. And we can see in the upper right, there's a pressure sensor underneath the strings and a distance sensor under the neck of the banjo. And this allows my computer to know sort of how I'm playing the instrument. These sensors then go to this funny blue, a little microcontroller, which is called an Arduino Uno. And that's what sends the data to the computer itself. And so as I'm performing the banjo, I have all these rainbow colored wires that connect my instrument to my laptop through this microcontroller. And the result is that I get to make music that changes every time I perform it a little bit. So even though I'm usually in solo mode doing this, though not always, there's still a sense of exploration and openness and improvisation involved. In other words, I don't just press play on a backing track and play along with it. That as I'm performing, the computer will tease out parts of what's going on. Am I moving my hand a little bit more? Am I holding notes a little longer? Am I sliding on the neck? And then the sounds will change as a result of that. And so that's what I mean by this idea of interactive music. Here's a quick little sample of that. We'll play just a brief sample from one of my releases called Post and Beam. And this is an arrangement of a traditional Appalachian song called East Virginia. I was born and raised in East Virginia. I wasn't actually born and raised in East Virginia. I was born and raised in Huntsville, Alabama. So, and I'm still in Alabama. All right, this is another project. This is an ongoing project. And in this case, I am building the instruments myself. The idea here is to use digital fabrication techniques to create instruments to be played by a percussion ensemble. And so I'm designing these instruments using some software and that allows me to specify the shape and the size, and I'll show a little bit of that in just a minute. And then the instruments are created using a laser cutter or laser engraver or 3D printers or other digital fabrication methods. And so this goes a little bit towards not quite a sculptural object, but a little bit towards the visual side of things. And these instruments are designed to be swung around on the end of a string, like a very ancient instrument called a bull roarer that is found all over the world. And many, many cultures have used a bull roarer. That's the instrument we see on the bottom with the rows of holes. And the other instruments are variations of that. Many of them are whistles, or they have rubber bands on them that makes sort of vaguely ominous whirring noises as you swing them around. And so a little bit about my process here, because when I like to show the code, show my work, because I consider computer code, even though I'm not trained as a computer scientist, this is really part of my artistic practice, writing the code that underlies, that's running alongside the music that I play, or that's used to generate the instruments, or later we'll see to generate visual work. That's really an important material for me. The way that watercolors might be an important material for someone else, or found objects. So this is an example of some code that's used to generate this whistle. And I designed this so that I could easily change a few lines of code, and it would change the size of the whistle, which influences the pitch that the whistle produces when it's rotated on the end of a string. And so this is using a program called OpenSCAD that allows me to do this kind of parametric design. Big fancy words. I made Corinna say a lot of fancy words in the introduction, so she did great. Here's a variation of it where I take this single whistle module and use it as kind of like the trunk of a tree and the branches of a tree. And in this case, I can control the size of each branching node, and that allows this group of whistles to play sounds that are all related to each other in pitch. So, and it makes a kind of chord or bird-like whistling sound when it's swung around. And it's just building on, this is the power of code. When you start with a single module, I can build on that and grow these structures. So this is some work that I'm starting out with. I don't always, we're gonna skip the video of that. I don't always build instruments. Sometimes I write music just for existing instruments. The way that, you would think about a traditional composer putting shapes on paper that are, it's a kind of drawing, but interpreted by musicians to make sound. This is a piece for a string ensemble. And I often work in this way where there's a kind of map that you can explore the piece as if you're exploring a city by moving around the subway stops. And one of the movements here shows a little bit of the graphic notation that is sometimes used to indicate the kind of gestures that I want the performers to make. And here's an example of what a realization might sound like, or once sounded like. Here's another score that has a similarly nonlinear approach to it. In this case, the performers choose anywhere around the outside circle to begin, and they work their way back to where they started, and then they traverse the inside connections. and then they go in the opposite direction back around the circle. I should have mentioned that last little snippet was from a performance by the Austin New Music Co-op in Austin, Texas, a group that I worked with quite a lot in the mid 2000s, and featured Fred Longberg-Holm as a cello soloist. And this snippet of recording of this piece is by the Amernay String Quartet, and was recently released on a CD, so it's commercially available. You can find the Amernay String Quartet and hear the whole thing. Follows from Hummingbird. So I could live in that a long time, but we're going to skip along because there's so much more to share, and we want to have time for a conversation. So some of the work that I do is presented more in gallery settings and museum settings, and takes the form of installations or visual art pieces. One of them is the piece that Corinna mentioned earlier, Mirror, Trace, and Trimble. Let me share a different screen so that you can see this work. This was a collaboration with visual artist and musician Jane Cassidy, and musician and composer Tim Feeney, and percussionist, and myself. And it was presented at the Contemporary Arts Center in New Orleans. This is an installation view. We can see Jane's really beautiful video work and projections on multiple screens. And the area behind these two main screens is a ramp where the visitors to the installation could walk up and down the ramp. And attached, here we see a picture of them walking. Attached to the handrails are a special kind of speaker that transmitted sound through the structure of the handrail. And so the sound that we hear in the installation is coming from the physical aspects of the space itself, vibrating the space itself, rather than the air in the space. And so here's a quick snippet, and you can see our smiling faces down below. Jane is now Boston and Ireland based, and Tim Feeney is at the California Institute of the Arts. I'm going to skip ahead there just so that we can keep this moving along. But I've lost my, there we are.
These are great. Sorry. This is like such a great kind of overview. I knew a little bit, but there's so much that I didn't know.
Thanks. I've got too much to share though. Here we go. This is, are we seeing the With Hidden Noises pictures? This is a work that was born out of frustration. I love Marcel Duchamp, a really important influence on my work. I consider him also a very important sound artist, and his work with Hidden Noise, one of the earliest sound works, because the original sculpture with the ball of twine had an unknown object inside of it. And when you shake it, you would hear a sound. It's in the collection at the Philadelphia Museum of Art. And unfortunately, well, fortunately for them, to preserve it, you can't actually touch it, but that means you can't really shake the work and find out what's inside of it. And so I was frustrated by that and decided I would make a project where I would make a replica of Duchamp's work and embed it with sensors, like you see in the center bottom of the picture. These sensors, they respond to tilt and shaking and motion of the object. And so then I could put this in a gallery setting and have speakers surrounding the visitors, who could come and pick up the object and move the object and manipulate it. And it would take them through a tour of what I imagine Duchamp's sound world might be like. So I took many of his other visual art works and translated them into sound and sort of hid them inside this sound installation as kind of like sonic Easter eggs. And here's a quick little snippet, a video snippet of that.
Débarrasser les bras. Des ailes. Tire. Folgen. Sharp. Tenue.
So that's just one little area you can get to. And that features the voice of Nicole Perafit, who is a poet and visual artist and performer as well. So great to have her as part of that project. Sometimes my work is more like soundtrack, sound for video, although it's usually not as cleanly divided as you might think in a movie world. And one project that I want to highlight here is a piece called Brush Mind Secondhand. That's a collaboration with the poet Hank Lazar. And this is shown in an installation setting. One of my other pieces you can also see, called Pink Noise, is in the background, where the pink glow is coming from that. Hank has a really important contemplative Buddhist. He would describe himself as a Jewish Buddhist, or a Buddhist Jew, or something along those lines. And so his meditation practice is really important to his work. And during this phase, he was writing with these brush pens and writing a very minimal kind of poetry. Jane Cassidy, again, did an animation for this work, and I'll show you a quick snippet of that. So it's Hank's words, Jane's animation, and then my sounds that go along with that. Oh, and I'm checking the time. Okay, we're doing good. Let's see, let's do another share right here. Yeah, is that a waving your hand like hold up, or are we doing okay,
No,
Karina?
you're doing good. You're doing good. There was the
okay.
A-okay.
A-okay, good. I'm just gonna drop right in the middle of this piece. again, I could stay here all day. And if you want to do that, there's the link to the video. So you can stay there all day too. Let's get back and look at the next little category of work. So some of the work that I do is only visual and doesn't really have a sound component, but it does often deal with software. There's some sort of computer media element involved. This is a piece that has a very long title. It's called Work of Art for Every Entry in Index Subjects Library of Congress. And it exists as a physical object that can be shown in a gallery, and it also exists as an online experience, and I'll show that to you. It's a work of art that's really a database. The database inside of it is where the art happens, and so it's a list of the Library of Congress subjects index. So everything that something could be about, and it's presented as a kind of mashup on a representation of a note card. So it's like a little reference card. You pull out a reference and it describes an imaginary work of art. And so it just takes the work of art's media, and then it puts together some phrases, including an entry from the Library of Congress subjects index. I'm a library nerd. I worked in libraries when I was a kid. So I keep coming back to this idea of libraries and the way we represent information. And so here's the online version of this. I'll post the link into the chat in a minute. It will just cycle through these generated artworks, conceptual works. This one is describing a halftone print that sheds light on the art of Bashkir. And it's often not very eloquently phrased, but the way that you would see something in an index or in a card catalog if you were looking for something. And every time you run this, you can just press the little play button. Every time you run it, you get a different work of art that describes itself, and I have no idea what's going to happen next. It's a random mashup from these different databases. So video art highlighting congressional privileges and immunities that describes aqueducts, Cuba. So like I could make that piece, I think. That would be a fun piece to make. A collection of photographs which can be found curling relating to plains top minnow. I have no idea what that means, but I'm gonna run with that. Let's try one more. A salted paper print illustrating abused women on the topic of Zakriaba Indians. Okay, I'd have to do some research on that. But I think salted paper has to do with a really old photography technique. I'm not entirely sure. I'm not a photographer. All right, here's the link to that if you're interested in playing along with that on your own. And then I want to talk about, briefly talk about two other visual-oriented pieces. This is a work that is shown that's participatory. It's an invitation for audience members to create their own flag, and it's called a catalog of imaginary flags. The software starts with some templates of familiar flags, and then it gives the user or visitor just a simple interface to rotate and resize and recolor. And then when you like your flag, you can save it. And so these are some of the flags that people have generated by using the software. And then eventually the software winds up on a Twitter feed. at imaginary flags. It's not super active right now, but every now and again, a new flag will show up. When the work is shown somewhere, the Twitter feed springs to life. So there's another, this is really a visual piece. And right now I'm in the process of moving this software into the next phase with a collaborator. We're exploring ways that we can use deep learning, neural nets, and AI in order to create some flags. And then the last thing that I want to show, this is something that I was working on when Karina and I were at Hambidge over the summer. This is some drawing software, and I'm building on existing code that has to do with simulating objects moving through space and gravitational fields. And the way that I'm using this right now is driving it with audio. So I will perform on an instrument or write a piece of music for another instrumentalist to perform, and use their audio to spawn particles that then interact with the virtual gravitational fields in space. And so this can result as a print that can be exhibited, or it can be a video that that documents a performance, or it could be something that is created live in a concert situation. And so this is work in progress. I'm figuring out the ways that I like to work with it, different ways of drawing with it. And I'm really having fun thinking about mark making and lines and things that visual artists think about, and but also bringing my musician background into that. Here's another version of that. And so that we can have some time to talk, I'm going to wrap it up there. That was a whole lot. So thanks for hanging with me. Again, the links are in the chat. If you're interested in being in touch after this Connect and Create episode, please do reach out to me. I would love to chat.
Wow. Well, that was extraordinary. Thank you so much for, I feel like I've gone through a whole, I don't know, long period of technology and music and visual art and a little politics thrown in there, but very kind of quietly. And sometimes I think that's the most powerful way, right? It's like you can be loud and in someone's face, but when you're subtle, like just make your own flag, like make your own statement, that's something very powerful. So, and I love how you brought us through that whole journey with that like very first handmade kind of, I'm just going to use the word basic for lack of better words, musical instrument to all the technology. And I love all of your collaborations that you do. Maybe we could come up with something. I love collaborating with people.
Absolutely. I do too. I think that that's the Collaborative Arts Research Initiative at the University of Alabama that I'm part of. The abbreviation is CARI or CARI, and that's really that's the main driver of the reason that program exists. And it's a real pleasure to be part of that and to engage with so many different people, not only artists, but also scientists and folks working in so many different disciplines. So the collaborative part is a really important part of my work. It's hard to do these days when we're all in our own little boxes on a screen, but it's still important and active. Like Hank Lazar and I, whose work I showed, we're actively working on our next project together. And so there's more to come with those collaborations.
Great. Well, thank you. Yeah, I'll have to send you an international collaborative video that I did with some people. We had a couple different musicians and very different, like almost like operatic, and then like kind of healing sound bowl, kind of that polar opposite, and a spoken word, and three visual artists, and a digital animator, so it was pretty wild. But yeah, and collaborating is amazing. And I'm curious personally about the poet that you, with the black and white texts, it seemed like you wanted to share more about that. And then before I ask all the questions, if anyone here in our audience, hello, Bill Gould, so nice to see you, or Susie or Stephen, or anyone from Facebook Live, if you have a question and you're on Facebook Live, just feel free to put it in the chat and I'm monitoring that. And anyone here, if you want to, come off mute, or you could raise your hand, but there's a small group, so you could probably just come off mute. We'd love to hear from you. And in the interim, Holland, if you want to share anything about your work with that poet, I was really struck by that. That was very meditative.
For sure. That's really our goal is to, with that work, was to translate part of the contemplative experience that generated the text into an experience for the reader, so to speak. Hank, he created a series of brush mind pieces, and that's actually the second time that we collaborated together. The first time was included some of the same crew, but also other musicians involved. And the second time was a smaller set of that. And it was really, really fun work to think about taking the written word that is on the page, and he created the objects, as not really art books, but I mean, not far from it either. And thinking about how to move the reading experience into a time-based experience and activate it with sound. So that was a great way for us to work together. And since then, we've done live performances where I'll play the banjo, for example, and he will read his work, and we'll respond to each other as the performance unfolds. So less of a produced kind of experience and more about being present in the moment for the words and the sounds. And so we're continuing that work. We've done a series of recordings that it will someday find their way out into the world. And we're working with a whole new group of text. He's very prolific, and that's wonderful. During COVID, he wrote this amazing book called COVID Sutras. And that is, I just think I think it's an important piece that represents this time. There's a lot of COVID work, and you might not want to deal with it right now, but I can recommend COVID Sutras from Hank Lazar. I think it's a great book. Do we have other questions, Karina?
Let's see. Anyone here in our room have a question? You're welcome to share, and we'd love to create a little dialogue. You could even come off video if you wanted. Let's see, let me check and see if we do none on the Facebook Live either. All right, well, anything that you want to share, anything else about?
Well, I think I would circle back to this concept of practice is practice, because now that we see the variety of work, sometimes my frustration is that I'm not sure that the work goes together. And I think a lot of people who make things get, you follow a thread and it takes you to a place you didn't expect to be. And then you find out you ask, why am I here? And what does this have to do with this other thing that I'm supposed to be doing? And that has been a tension for me for a long time, and even continues to be. I remember when I was doing my MFA work, one of my mentors said, don't worry about it. I was frustrated because there were some artists who had such a such an easily distinguishable style, such a shtick, even a kind of thing where you would see that and know immediately that was their work, or they had a process that was so clearly evident in what they did. And I think that I've sort of was jealous of that and continue to be jealous of that in a way. And I remember my mentor saying, don't worry about it. Your work is connected. You just don't see it yet. And he was really right about that, that I might be making a score for a string quartet or writing code or playing old time banjo and thinking about Appalachian folk songs. And on the surface, those things aren't as connected as they turn out to be. But then when I step back, I realize that my practice really is in all of those things, and the things that I make with it, eventually I'll figure out, oh, right, that's what I'm interested in. And now, as I've done more work, I actually find myself thinking, oh, this again? I'm back to this same idea, right? Like I thought that if I were working with flags, it would be something different, but nope, it's always the same idea that comes back and that comes back. And so I guess for a really quick overview of a variety of work, those connections aren't entirely evident, and I can't expect that they would be. But for me, when I go back and interrogate the work and the process and think about it, I do see and hear the things that connect that work. And so that leads me to not despair, just show up and keep practicing. Practice and practice.
That's a really great motto. Thank you for sharing that. I mean, that across the board, you could say for almost any discipline, right? That the practice is the practice, right? Whether it's art or spirituality or meditation or music or digital, this, that, or the other. So listen, we also have a question in the chat from Stephen. What would happen if someone created art from the Library of Congress work? Would you have some IP in that? What's IP? Like input?
That intellectual property.
Oh, intellectual property. There we go.
I think that intellectual property. That's a great question. And I haven't thought about it. But my I think that the place that I would start is that it belongs to whoever made the work. That just because I generated this conceptual version of it wouldn't prevent someone else from actually realizing it. So I don't think that I would be inclined to pursue legal action. Right? There's a little bit of a snarky side of that piece, because as when I'm in the classroom, sometimes students, and I often work with students in a creativity seminar who are not art majors or music majors. They don't think of themselves as making creative work, and I ask them to do that. And so they'll often say, well, what should I make the work about? Which is an interesting, right? We have a popular imagination that an artist says, oh, I'm going to make a work about whatever that subject is. And then they sit down and they do that instead of making work and then figuring out what it's about, which is more my way of working. And my peers, I think, function that way. But often my students have this sort of backwards way of saying, like, I don't know what to do. I don't know what to make the work about. And so that was one little motivation for making that Library of Congress piece, was so that I could always just say, click, here you go. Here's what you need to make. And then, of course, it's bizarre and absurd. And they're like, I'm never going to make that. And that's okay, too. But it gets us thinking about it. Gosh, I hope I answered your question, Stephen. Thank you for that.
Great. Any other questions? We've got a few more minutes. Bueller. Bill, it's nice to see you here. I don't think I've seen you on Connect and Create before.
Hi.
Hi.
Lovely to be here. I do have a question. I'm so overwhelmed by the scope of Holland's creativity, and I'm confess wholly unfamiliar with his work. So it's overwhelming to absorb and try and come up with an intelligent question. But I'm sort of curious about, this is a chicken versus the egg question, I guess. If more of your work is audibly inspired versus visually inspired? Do you more often hear sounds or rhythms in your head and you create a piece based on that, or is it often visual inspiration that causes you to compose sounds to somehow represent visual images or dreams or something?
Thank you for that question, Bill, especially coming up with something that when Karina puts you on the spot, coming up with so cogent.
We've known it for 25 years.
I think that that there's never a simple answer for that, except I clearly experience the world more through my ears than through my eyes. And so whenever anyone, whenever you have to go through those terrible thought experiments about like which sense you would lose and how would that affect your life, for me, hearing is much more important than seeing. And so I'm definitely more interested starting from this all around you feeling. That's one thing I love about hearing is that you participate in the world, and we don't have a good non-visual side of this. We say like an observer, but we need like a listener, right? You participate in the world as a listener, and everything is around you, and you're situated in the space. Whereas when I'm experiencing the world through my eyes, it's something in front of me, and I'm unaware of other things around me. And so I prefer the mode of being a listener, where I'm part of what's going. I feel more like I'm part of what's going on. I'm sure I'm not making any sense here, but that's where I start. Now, is it always that simple? Absolutely not, right? Like I want things to look a particular way. I also am inspired by things that I look at. That follows from hummingbird work, was actually inspired by some small paintings on raw canvas. And so there's definitely, right, I'm interested in the interplay of these things, and that means that I'm in a privileged hearing, but I'm not going to shut out seeing as well. And I know I've gone on too long with this question, but it's a great question. And there's one other thing, which is that I recognize that we have a visual bias as a culture, right? We're in this, like, look at us right now, we're in this Zoom thing, and it's important that we see each other, but the audio is terrible compared to the visual element of this. And so I recognize our deficit as a culture in dealing with things that we hear, that we want to see cool things. We want movies with amazing visual effects, but nobody pays attention to the sound, or they don't think they pay attention to the sound. And so I'm interested in pushing against that actively by privileging hearing over sight.
Thank you for that wonderful answer.
Thanks, Bill.
Thanks, Bill.
On the spot. Holland, we do have one more question in the chat from Stephen. If you want to, do you want me to read it? Why don't I read it so people on Facebook can hear it and
great.
respond to that. So these performance pieces that don't come out the same way twice, do you ever go back and tinker with them, or just go forward and hear the next version?
Right, that's a great question. When I'm making them, I'm tinkering all the time. And the process of making them is the process of performing, listening, changing the parameters and the sounds and the balance and trying it again and listening and trying it again and listening. And so eventually I get to a point where I don't know exactly what's going to happen, but I know the sound world that we're going to be in. And so that's the point where it's okay, and where that piece is finished, even though there's never a definitive performance or recording. Any performance or recording could represent that piece just as well as any other. But I know that that work is done, and then it's time to move on to the next work and make something else. One of the metaphors that I use for those pieces is like a playground. So, you build the playground equipment, maybe a climbing wall, and you go and you can experience that place and you can engage in all kinds of activities there. But every time you go, it might be slightly different. Like you might spend more time on the merry-go-round than on the swings, but you know that the merry-go-round is the merry-go-round. So you can go faster or slower, but it's still going to be basically that same experience. So there were times earlier when I was really interested in the computer being an improvising partner, and I tried to build environments that were less fenced in, the way a playground might be fenced in, where I could wander off the reservation and have no idea what was going to happen next. And I think that's a worthy goal, and that's a cool area to explore, but that just wasn't what I was most interested in doing. And so I started putting up little fences around my playgrounds and calling them pieces.
Great.
Thanks for that question. It's a great question.
Yeah. Well, I noticed my sister's on Facebook Live all the way in California. Hi, Alyssa. Well, listen, it's been such a pleasure. I feel like we could just listen to and look at simultaneously your work. And tell me before we complete. We've gone over just a few minutes, but I'm fine with that, and hopefully our audience is as well. And I'm just curious, like, what do you have that you're looking forward to in the future? Anything that we should look out for? Any projects, or like, if you don't, like, what do you want to happen in the future? What's exciting for you?
Right. The Library of Congress piece is being shown both physically in East Tennessee and online. And my website will have information about those events. The piece that uses the bull roars and invented instruments has been postponed due to COVID, but is finally going to be premiered at Cal Arts in fall of 2021. That's where we're at now. Let's keep that going. And so I'm looking forward to that. Continued collaborations with Hank Lazar. I guess the other plug is that I have a couple of recordings coming out. I have a recording of a solo recording of me playing what sounds like an electric guitar, but is actually an electric guitar banjo hybrid with some audio processing software that I created for this set of pieces. That recording is called Tell a Gossip, and it will be out shortly, probably next month. I don't have the exact date on that right now. And it's being released by Tape Drift recordings. So I'm really excited about that coming out. And then there's a piece that I made for a violin duo who perform as Miolina. And that piece is on a recording that will be released on the 5th of March. Of all Alabama-based composers making music for the violin duo Miolina. So those are a couple of things coming up, and hopefully there'll be more.
Yay! Awesome. Well,
Yay! Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you, Karina. This has been fun.
Yeah, thank you. I feel overwhelmed in the best of ways one could be overwhelmed, and really pleasure to see the work. And it was so great to connect with you at Hambridge. I'm glad that we can connect this way. It's not quite the same as the screened-in porch, but you should check out Hambridge. Has some really cool things they're doing in Atlanta. Maybe there's an opportunity for one of your pieces to be a part. It's the something art lab, Hambridge. If you look on their website, it's called the something art lab, and they have some studios in this interesting place, and they have a gallery right now in town. So, stay connected with that, because it would be great to have some of your visual and audio work here in Atlanta.
Yeah, I would love that.
Yeah. All right. Well, as we wrap up, any final last words that you'd like to share with our audiences on Facebook or our little group here in
I
the
think
Zoom room?
just thanks for the opportunity to connect. And it's great to get questions and see some new names, not really new faces in this particular format, but we'll pretend. And please reach out and be in touch. I'd love to know what's going on and stay in touch. So thanks again.
You're welcome. Do you want to say your website and
Yes, that would help, wouldn't it? So it's my name, Holland, like the country, and last name Hopson, Hopson. So hollandhopson.com is the best place to find me.
Awesome. I'll put that in the Facebook Live as well.
Yeah.
Great.
That's
Well,
great.
it's so great to have you here, and thank you very much. I look forward to our next time of
Thanks.
meeting.
Yep. Look forward to tuning into more Create and Connect episodes.
Yeah.
Keep it going.
Keep it going. And if you have more, we have spaces in the future. You're welcome to come back and do episode 2.
I don't have anything else to share.
You can just do the poetry the whole time. It was so great. All right, Holland, thank you so much for being with us. It's really been a pleasure. And all of you that have joined, thank you. And thank you, Fulton County Council for the Arts, for your generous contributions. And come back next week for a surprise.